Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Brandelyn Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director here at FLOC. And I'm so excited to welcome you all to our third Fireside Chat with our very special guest, Mr. Justin Hinton, 7 News reporter. Justin, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I feel very special, and thank you for that intro.
Well, we're very, very happy to have you. And we're super excited to learn more about you and your career and how you got started. So just a little bit about our Fireside Chats. We have students who are involved in our post-secondary program, as well as our college and career readiness program. And so we'd love to introduce them to a variety of careers and give them the opportunity to learn about how you got there, how you chose your college, your major, all those wonderful things that got you to this fabulous place that you are now on television every day. Super excited to watch you. So Justin, why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up? And also, what was your favorite summer activity as a kid?
Ooh, all right. Excuse me. My name is Justin Hinton. I've been a reporter with 7 News for about a year and a half. I'm originally from San Diego, so California through and through. I ended up going to Berkeley. Go Bears! I believe.
Go Bears! Okay, sorry.
I know you're like that. I believe blue and gold. And so then have traversed across the country for different jobs with reporting. I was in Beaumont, Texas for a little bit. I was in Dallas for a little bit. I was in Asheville, North Carolina. And now I'm here in the DMV. So super excited to be here and enjoying what I get to do and telling stories every single day. As far as my favorite summer activity, gosh, I don't know. Well, when you grow up in Southern California, it doesn't really rain that much. And so in the summers, we're a little more inland. Like I said, I was in San Diego, but a little more inland from the actual city. And so I remember when it came time we didn't have a pool, right? So a lot of fun was getting the hose and having my mom or dad kind of water us, my brother and I, as we'd run around the yard. And so that was a lot of fun being able to do that and just hang out and be a kid, or water guns, like the super soakers.
Yes.
Fun. My brother and I and our godbrothers would have a lot of fun with that.
Super soakers are awesome. And you're right. Amazing? We used to barbecue on Christmas Day in California because
you can do that.
It was just warm.
Right. I look outside, and I look outside today and I'm freezing, and I
really can't even speak to what's happening outside. I'm not here for it ever. So Justin, when you were a kid, we all had dreams of a variety of careers, usually influenced by the cartoons we watched and television shows. What was your dream career when you were a child?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about this with my parents, and it was the lawyer, the doctor, mostly a lawyer though, because I like to argue with everyone. So they always, we're gonna be a great lawyer, but it was never really a reporter. And I was thinking about how that kind of came into my life. And it's interesting, right? Because as a kid, like, news was a part of our family, especially local news. I remember as I was getting ready for school in the morning or eating breakfast, the TV would be on and we'd be watching our local news station. And I remember my parents watching the BET nightly news at night as I was kind of head off to bed, but I don't ever remember having that conversation of, yes, this is what I'm going to do. As a kid, I was more into the performing arts. I was more into community service. And so that's kind of what my activities were geared toward, especially throughout high school. I didn't do the yearbook. I wasn't part of the journalism program. And it wasn't until probably the end of my senior year going into my freshman year of college that I knew that I was going to be a reporter and was really focused on that. Like, I love telling stories, but I didn't feel like I was very good at it. I don't know if you remember, I mean, I know you do because we've talked about this before, but in Living Color, like, that was our show as a kid. Yeah. Me, my brother, and my godbrothers, and we would get around and we would do reenactments. Homie the Clown was one of our favorites. And so we'd all go around and start making up these stories. And we had this, I think it was a tape recorder that we were using. And every time it came to me, I would blow it. And they would all make fun of me, and because I just wasn't good at making stuff up. And so now I found a career where I can still tell stories and I don't have to make anything up, right? I just have to weave in what folks are telling me. And it's a lot of fun, and I really get to enjoy it. It's something different every single day. And I get to be outside, which is also really important for me, except on super cold days.
Just on winter in the East Coast, correct. Do you remember what the spark was that said, I'm going to college to study journalism? because, you mentioned like you wanted to tell stories, you weren't, were in performing arts and all of that, but what was the thing that honed in your focus that said journalism?
I honestly, I don't know. I really don't. And that's the cool thing about life, right? You don't have to know, you don't have to have all the answers. And it's funny because when I got to Cal, I said, yes, this is what I'm doing. I'm studying journalism and I want to be a television news reporter. And I walk into the door and they're like, yeah, we don't have an undergraduate journalism program. So I was like, okay. So now we kind of have to switch gears and figure out, how are we going to make this work? And that's one of the best things that I loved about my college experience, because it wasn't geared towards journalism, right? So I had to kind of figure out my way and navigate that space in order to get to where I needed to go. And so I'm super grateful for that. It taught me a lot and really made me focus on what I wanted to do and find the resources that were there and connect with the people who could get me where I wanted to be.
Justin, I think you just made an incredible point where you get there, you're excited, you're honed in, you're like, I got it. And they're like, so sorry, we don't have what you need, but you didn't give up, right? You, like you mentioned, you pulled resources, you figured it out. What did you wind up majoring in college, and how did that prepare you for your career?
Yeah, so my degree is in mass communications. And so I knew that was the closest that I could get to actual journalism. And it's funny, you may not like this, but when I started and my whole career, or not career path, but my college journey, I knew I was going to Stanford. I know. Stanford was my number one, like I knew that I was going to Stanford. And so when I remember the day that I got that small envelope, and my mom had prepared me. She goes, the TV shows, they don't do it justice, right? If you see a large envelope, that means you got in, because it's usually the welcome packet and the small letter is the one that says, sorry, we don't have space. And so I came home. I was supposed to do this scholarship program, couldn't find it. It was downtown. Come back home. I opened the mail. It was on a Saturday. I remember this, like, it was a terrible day. I opened up the mail, see that small envelope from Stanford, and my heart just sunk. And then more bad stuff happened that day. And it was tough to deal with, right? And then as the other letters started coming and my other friends started getting into schools, I still wasn't getting an acceptance. Now, mind you, I had a 4.45 GPA. Like, I was doing everything that I possibly could. And I was like, why doesn't anyone want me? I was frustrated. And then finally Cal came through. I think at that point, I don't think it was the letter that I got first. I think the decisions were announced online. And so I remember logging on and seeing that you're accepted. And I'm like, I'm going to college. and what I've come to realize is, that was all God, right? It was a decision that he knew that I was going to make the wrong decision if it was left up to me, and Cal was supposed to be. So even though it didn't have a journalism program, all the things that it did have helped propel me forward. So I came in, I worked as for a Black magazine that was on campus, and that's kind of where I got my start. I quickly became the editor-in-chief in that. Had so much fun doing that, learning and kind of teaching myself a little bit. And then what I was able to do, because Cal has a great journalism school, which I had no idea. It's on the far north end of campus in this ugly building. You would have no idea that that's even there. And I ended up connecting with some J school students who I'm still very close to today. And they showed me into some of those buildings. I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff is amazing. And so from there and building those relationships and those connections propelled me forward. Then I was able to get an internship at the CBS station in San Francisco. Because of the way that BART, the public transportation out there, operates, I was able to get there easily. If I'd gone to Stanford, it wouldn't have been that easy trying to get to a television station. And so all of these things just lined up so perfectly that it just was the right decision. The people I've met, the opportunities that I've had, I was able to study abroad. All of these things fit perfectly together, and I wouldn't change anything in the world. So I would tell anybody, if you don't get into that school that you want to get into, or you switch careers, or you switch decisions of where you want to go, it's okay. It will all work out, and it's just preparing you for those next steps in the future.
I think you're absolutely right. Like, my dream school was UCLA, and I didn't get in. But now knowing how the UC system works, like you get into one or the other, like you don't get into both unless you are just like ridiculous, which I was not. Well, I was ridiculous in some ways, but not the ones that count. But you know, the thing is that you're absolutely right. Like there's going to be disappointments, and there's going to be things that you just know you're supposed to do. You know, like this is what I'm supposed to do. But to your point, life changed for me at Berkeley, and there's no other school I could ever imagine myself having gone to. And the people that I met and the relationships I built, the education I received, like you can't go wrong going to the #1 public university in the entire world. I mean,
I was waiting for that to come out.
Throw that out there. I'm just saying, go Bears. But you know, it's really important to know for our students to really understand that it's like disappointments will happen. You might have to hit some resets, but it's where you go and how you take advantage of those resources that matter the most.
Like that's life. Like life is filled with disappointments. And if we just crumbled and went under a rock every single time that would happen, you don't grow, you don't move forward. So it's how you adjust. And that's something that I have to deal with in my job every single day. I can't tell you how many days what I started with is not how it ended, right? And so how do you adjust to that? Because at the end of the day, I still have to tell a story. I still have to fill my time slot. When it comes to the news, when you turn it on, Justin has to have a story that's there. So it's part of life.
Okay, put a pin in that because I definitely want to circle back to that one.
Okay.
But I really want to learn more about your studying abroad. So I do know that you spent some time in Cairo. Is that correct? Tell us a little bit about that. How did that come about? Was that a part of your undergrad experience? Like talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so senior year comes up and I'm getting ready to graduate and I'm thinking, okay, this is also theory-based. And yes, my internships were great, but I didn't feel like I was quite ready to go into the real world and to get a job as a reporter. And then that study abroad popped up in my head. And I said, I wonder if I can take a 5th year where the school will pay for it and I can still get that hands-on experience. So I found a program at the American University in Cairo, talked to the study abroad advisors. I said, this would be a 5th year. They said, that's fine, it'll still be covered. And I said, cha-ching. And, and part of me had always wanted to go to Africa, right? So I was like, check, where do I sign? Let's go. So I get there, loved my experience. I'm getting to work with cameras and learning everything, but it was kind of a basic understanding, but it was great, right? So taking what I learned from my internships and now getting that real hands-on experience, I felt good. So then winter break happens. And if anybody knows anything about 2010 in Egypt and in all of the Middle East, you had Arab Spring. So this was an experience of all experiences, to be someplace where the world is literally changing right before your eyes. And for me, as somebody who wants to study journalism and wants to go into this field, this was incredible. I lived about a 30-minute walk from Tahrir Square. And so kind of one day, I remember when everything was unfolding, I walked down, and I had just moved out. So I'd moved out of the dorms and was living with a roommate. He was a guy from Canada. And so we'd walk down to Tahrir Square just to see what was happening. And there was some sort of protest around the metro station. And I remember these guys were like chanting, and I actually had video of this.
Protests throughout Egypt erupted as citizens and foreigners alike gathered for the 3rd day to overthrow the 30-year presidency of Hosni Mubarak.
And I'm like rolling on this with my video camera. And just all the stuff that was unfolding in my neighborhood, things were on fire. And it was just like, what is happening? So the advisor, this is over like winter break. So the advisor had gone home, who's from Lebanon. And so he had called us and was saying, hey, if we're going to evacuate, we're going to do it as a university. And I felt safe the entire time, I really did. And so I told him, I said, his name is Fadi. I said, Fadi, well, what if I want to stay? I feel safe. And he goes, that's fine, but you will no longer be a student. You'll be unenrolled. You won't have your insurance anymore. So I said, okay, what time does the bus come? And
right.
Sure enough, they organized the van to come and get us. We're driving through the city, going past all these checkpoints. Get to the airport. And so then we were evacuated and we were sent to Spain. So then I got to spend 2 or 3 days in Spain. At this point, I don't think I had talked to my parents yet. And because we didn't have that in Egypt, they are watching the news and seeing what's happening and thinking, oh my gosh, my baby, what is he doing?
Right.
And so finally, I think right as I was about to leave Spain, the advisors had told me, hey, Justin, obviously your program was supposed to be for a year because it's now cut in half. It's done. You can, and we're not going to be going back to Egypt right now. You can either go back to Cal and take more classes. And I'm like, no, I graduated. I literally walked with my class and everything. And I was done. This is the 5th year. This is like my gap year into the real world. I said, I'm not doing that. They said, okay, well, you can be done with school, or they said you can go somewhere else. And I said, way to bury the lead. Where can I go? They gave me 3 options. They said Israel, Germany, or Korea. I chose Korea. And so when I got there, it was, so all this is happening when I should have been going through this program like months and months before. So everything was rushed and we were just trying to get me there. I remember even like my ID card, I didn't have a photo of myself. So the one that I sent, it's like this cheesy face of me going like this, because that was all I had at the time. And ended up sending that in, and it worked out where, lo and behold, I figured things out, met some great people. It was really difficult for the first month that I was there. I literally left a country that I loved, that I blended in because of the way that I look. And I'd made some really great friends, right? And a lot of those friends I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to. So you go from that to then going back home, then going to another part of the country or to the world, and then getting there and then sticking out like a sore thumb. I would literally have high school boys that would come up to me and start rapping and beatboxing. And if you know me, I don't like rap. Like rap is not my thing. Give me some R&B beats. Give me, right? So it was really, really hard. And then after about a month, I met this guy who was working at a coffee shop, and he turned out to be my brother and one of my best friends while I was there. He's from Korea. He ended up taking me to his hometown, where his parents don't speak any English. And I felt like I got a true, authentic Korean experience. And that moment changed my life in Korea. And I ended up loving it and enjoying my time there. So it was another semester that I was there before I came back. So when I got back to the States, I'm part of this organization called the National Association of Black Journalists. And so every year they have a journalism convention. And part of this convention is a career fair. And so you walk in and you get to show, the way you get jobs in this industry is you put together a reel of your best works, like a highlight reel. Mm-hmm. And you get in front of news directors and managers in the business. You say, hey, here's my stuff. They ask you some questions, and then great. And then that's how you get your job. So when I got back to this first convention that I had, I'm walking in there, shoulders back. I just got back from Egypt and Korea, and I've got all this stuff on my tape. I was like, where do I need to go? And so literally that got me to the front of the line. And so I remember I went and talked to the folks with NBC, and I talked to a news director in Dallas. Her name was Susan Tony. And so I gave her my tape, and she puts her, I think it was a DVD. She pops it in, like 2 seconds later, she pops it back out. It was bad. I was doing the best that I could with what I learned from internships, what you just did, right? So she pops it out and she gives me some advice, some critiques. And I said, okay. And I went around to other locations, and some folks said things that were off the wall. Others said things that were more in line with what she was saying. And so I went back home after all of this, and I said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do, because I want a job. So I took the advice that was similar across the board, and I repackaged those stories that I had shown them. Then I was also visiting my mom. There was some event that was happening in her town. And so I went out there and I shot this event. I even had my mom record me doing my stand-up, right? You see me and I'm walking and talking. That's my mom shooting the video. Gotta love moms, right?
I love it. Yes, moms.
So I ended up putting those stories back together and sending it back out to Susan Tully. And she looked at it and she sends me an email back and she goes, wow, you really took the initiative. You listened to the advice that I've given you, and this is much better. And the story makes more sense now because of X, Y, and Z. Just so happens we have this job that is open. It's a news associate, so basically like a producer training program. She goes, it starts in like a month. If we can get you out here, interview you, and if it's a good fit, then we can get you started. And I said, great, let's go for it. And that's how I got my first job in this business.
Wow.
So I thank Berkeley, I thank EAP, the Education Abroad program, and I thank NABJ, because all of those things really kind of came together to help me get that first job. And you never know where you're going to end up. Had I gone to Stanford, would that have happened? Who knows?
Right.
Happened with me going to Cal, and I'll take it.
That one decision that can change your whole life. I love it. So Justin, you have been in the news industry for almost a decade.
I just hit 10 years.
10 years. Congrats.
Just hit 10 years. Yeah.
Okay, so you have been in the news industry for a decade, and you've traveled across the country, and now we've learned, around the world, with, covering stories. And may I brag for a moment? You've even won an Emmy for your work.
I did.
Okay. I love your Emmy. I think it's amazing. I love telling everybody that. Is there a particular story or something that you covered that like really stands out as like, this was a moment I will never forget?
There are always those moments. And people ask me this often, and it's more so the moment that I'm in, how I'm feeling, and kind of what I want to share, because it varies and for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Hurricane coverage, you'll never forget. I remember my first hurricane. You're laughing at me.
I'm not laughing. I just
some of the videos
mm-hmm.
Where I'm standing out there and getting battered by wind and rain. Yeah. So Charleston was my first, or Hurricane Matthew in Charleston was the first hurricane that I covered. And just being out there and the kind of the adrenaline rush that you get when you're doing that. Obviously being safe the entire time and working with crews who had done it before and knew, the safety precautions to take and how to make sure you're staying safe is of the utmost important. But there's nothing like hurricane coverage. It's exciting. It can be scary sometimes, but you always want to make sure that you're staying safe, which is definitely something that we do. As far as stories, I had one that I did here that I really, really enjoyed. I met this woman, her name was Yantomi, and she's with Special Olympics DC. And this was a year and a half of not having any sports. And so for these athletes, super, super important for them to get back out and to be exercising. And it was one of the first couple of days where they were back. And Yantomi they call her the queen of bocce. But she's also the queen of tennis, as we saw, me and my photographer that day. I mean, she was smashing the ball left and right. And she was so competitive. And it was just so much fun to see the competitiveness, the drive, the joy that was back on her face and everybody else that was out there after not being able to do something that they loved for so long. That's why I love this job, to be able to talk to people like Yantomi, or to be able to, learn people's stories and where they come from and sharing that with the DMV. It's just so exciting and so awesome to be able to get that opportunity.
Now, Justin, I have to bring it up.
Uh-oh.
Your
I have to know what this is. I knew that was coming.
Reporter in North Carolina. He's going viral for his unexpectedly funny weather segment. Look at this. Justin Hinton is his name. He was covering a snowstorm last week when he says that he accidentally turned on the face filter before his report on Facebook Live.
Talk to us a little bit about that moment and like how it made you feel and like your perspective, because I think it's amazing. I think it's cute. But like, tell us how you feel about it.
So what happened was I was covering snow at my last job. I was in Asheville, North Carolina. And so we were doing a Facebook Live and I was in the car and setting up. And so I must have hit the mystery mask filter. Wasn't paying attention, then handed the phone to my photographer. And so I'm talking and going through all this thing and literally, and I don't know this at the time, but it is cycling through all these different face filters. No clue any of this is going on. People think that I did this on purpose, but I legitimately had no idea. Right. So I off and I'm trying to answer questions from the people who are commenting. So I come around to the side and he's still holding and I'm reading the comments and people are saying, oh, your face, what's happening with your face? This is hilarious. This is amazing. And because I'm no longer on the screen, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
So I'm really asking them, like, what are you guys talking about? It's doing something with my faces. Oh, I'll have to check afterwards. And then afterwards, I look back at it and I couldn't believe, like I was mortified.
It was live, right? So there was no way to go back.
I mean, it's to the point now where my phone is ringing. My boss had called me and they were saying that somebody had asked what was happening to our station's Facebook page because our numbers were just taking off. And I'm just grateful. Like it was wonderful. It was a great moment. It turned out to be something fun and funny. But no, it blew up. I had friends who were in Europe and they were telling me about it. They were watching it on the news there. And it was crazy.
it was a fun moment for me to see it. So, I mean, thank you. I mean, I understand from your perspective, but it really did kind of bring some joy. And so that's something that you can always hold on to. And it made you like a familiar face with around the world.
And the funny thing about that is that happened at the end of February of 2020, a month later, right? So
2020, yeah.
That last, I didn't think about it at the time, but when you start to put the dates together, it's like, wow. And then here we are still dealing with this pandemic. So it's, when you think about it like that, you're like, okay, you need to be able to give some folks some joy in those final moments right before all of the crazy.
2020.
Right, exactly. The craziness of 2020 and now 2021.
So Justin, you have, like we said, been in your career for many years. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've had to deal with adversity and like in your actual career?
I think in this industry, you move around a lot, right? You get to experience the country, which is great because you get to have different perspectives of different people. But also part of that, or part of what comes with that, is experiencing people who may not share the same values and belief systems as you, and that they're, which is great, right? But people have certain expectations and certain thoughts of how certain people are supposed to be. And I think that that's a big part of this industry and kind of how you adjust. And I know for me, one of the ways that I've been able to overcome some of those moments, right, where you might have somebody that might call you names, might and maybe doing it in a racist way, or may just be doing it because of ignorance, right? And I think the big part of how you get over that is having a strong support system. I have so many friends in this industry who have gone through other things as well, and we can talk about those things and figure out ways of how we cope and how we manage those. And then also there are great organizations in this industry, like the National Association of Black Journalists, that can help you and help you navigate those spaces. I also have some great mentors in this business that have helped me get to where I am. And so whenever there's a problem or some sort of adversity that I have to get over, it could be just, how do I tell this story better, right? That could be a challenge, or dealing with the political scene that we're in, right? And making sure that we are telling the most fair story that we possibly can and holding certain people that need to be held accountable, right? And making sure that we're doing that in the right way. And that can be a challenge, especially for young journalists who might be thrown into this world who have never had to do that before. So I think it's important to have that support structure to be able to guide you along the way, and people that you trust who are good role models in this industry and can move you forward. And like I said, NABJ has been a great tool and a great resource to be able to help me to do that.
So you mentioned a keyword, mentor.
Yes.
Can you tell us, do you currently have a mentor? Have you been a mentor? And like, how has mentorship played a role in your life?
I have tons of mentors, and they're different, right? Different types of people, men, women, from different parts of the country and different jobs. It's so important to have mentors because these people have been there. They understand, right? The problems that you're dealing with, they've probably dealt with it 3-4 times, right? So why go at it alone? You have people who can help you navigate that area. And likewise, that I have people that I'm asking for help. Same thing, I've been through things that other people who are coming up might have experienced. And so it's important to give back and to be able to help other people. I love looking at different reels of younger journalists to see what they're doing. And honestly, that inspires me to do better and to think like, oh, this is what they've got going on. I need to step my game up, because it's so cool to see that younger generation of the creativity and what they're doing and how that can inspire somebody else. I remember I was on a story actually, this point is probably a couple of months ago, and this kid, he's in college, but he was driving around with his mom, saw me, and he came up to me. He was very respectful, right? Once we finished our live shot that we were doing that day, he came up and he introduced himself and said that he was a journalism student and he wanted some advice, and so I helped him out. And then fast forward a few weeks after that, he reached out to me and he had to interview a journalist for a project. And so he wanted to interview me and kind of talk about my experiences and all that. And so that was really cool to be able to help him out and to give back in that way. There's always something coming up behind you. And so I'm very cognizant of that. I'm very, very much aware of that. People are always looking at you. And so I try to be the best version of myself that I possibly can so that they see that and it can inspire them.
There's a quote that I live by, and it says, great leaders develop other great leaders. And so being able to bring people up and give them those tools and those resources, like you want the people that you're helping to be better than you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, and there's no shame in that. Like,
and there's room for everybody, right? You don't have
Exactly.
to tear down anybody in order to get ahead. It's just not necessary. What's for you is for you. I remember one of my really, really close friends in this industry was up for a job. I didn't know this at the time. He was up for the same job that I was up for. And I was telling him about it because we'd started together and all this great stuff. So I was telling him about it and he didn't tell me that he was up for that same job. And so then he ended up getting it. And the reason I found out is because I had emailed them back saying, hey, I hadn't heard anything about you or about the job. And they're, oh yeah, we offered it to so-and-so. This person was also, you know them because you were tied to them in this way or shape or form. And so I ended up calling him. I said, hey man, why don't you let me know? And he goes, oh, I just felt bad. You were so excited about this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but here's the thing. If you'd have been excited for it too, I would have been just as excited for you. And the fact that you got it, it was for you, right? Different people, we're different types of journalists. We have different styles. What's for you is for you. What's for me is for me. Let's celebrate together that we're both, and one of us got it. That's exciting. So it kind of changed that perspective, and I think it helped him learn that, like, yeah, and reinforce for me that what is for you is for you, and what's for somebody else is for somebody else, and nobody can take that away.
I love that. And it's really because of the competitive nature of your industry. I think having that attitude is what's gotten you where you are. And so I love that. So if we have students who are interested in becoming news reporters, how would you recommend they get started, and what important things do they need to know to become a part of the news industry?
I think the biggest thing that people don't realize is that there are way more positions than just being reporters, right? Just the people that you see on TV. There are so many people working behind the scenes to get me on the air, the product and the news on the air that you just don't know. They're producers. Those are the folks who write the shows, who are talking to me in my ear saying, hey, we need you to wrap this up because you're going too long. Or something is happening below you, so we need you to stretch a little bit longer so we can fix this problem. Folks who are in management, right? We have the news directors, the executive producers. Those are the folks who are making more of the decisions. You have general managers. We also have photographers. So there are, and the list goes on and on and on, right? So there's way more than just the people you see on TV. So if you don't want to be on television, you don't have to be. So I would definitely encourage people to do that, especially producers. There are not a lot of really good producers in this industry. And so that's, if you like writing, like think about going that route. And those people move up pretty quickly because there's just not a lot of people who want to go and be producers. So that's important to think about the entire industry. The other thing that I would advise them to do is to find a mentor. If there's somebody, watch a lot of news, right? And if you see somebody that you like their style, their presentation, send them an email, find them. That we're everywhere. Every station has a website, right? Where you can people are and get their email address and just send a nice introductory note. And that could be one way of starting a mentorship, and to be able to ask them questions about what the industry is really, really like. Because I think that once you're in it, it may not look like what it does on the outside, which is anything, right? You have this idea of what it is when you're looking in, but when you're actually in it, it's completely different. I think a lot of people will think part of it is that the television news industry is so glamorous, and there are elements of it that are not glamorous at all, right? When they're struggling to get lunch breaks, right? Because you're bouncing around from story to story. You might be struggling to find a bathroom, right? Because you're going constantly. Those are the things that people don't necessarily tell you about, or that you don't realize. I like to put it this way: for people who have their important business meetings, right? Those happen at 9 o'clock in the morning, usually the first thing in your day. One of the important parts of our day happens at the very end. So imagine if you've gone through your entire day, right? You've dealt with problems, you've had to overcome that adversity, but then when you need to be your best, that's 10 minutes away from you going home. So when you think about it like that, it kind of changes that mindset, like, oh, okay, now I understand what I'm really getting into. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. And just read a lot, and watch and consume from a lot of different sources, right? Don't just stick to one thing. Look at what everybody's talking about and see the differences and how people are explaining things.
Fantastic. So we do have a couple of questions that our students submitted for you.
Oh, nice.
So we'll try not to, grill you too hard. Put on my reporter hat. So a lot of our students really ask questions about internships. Like what types of internships can students look for if they're looking into getting into the news industry? Are they just sort of blanketed internships, or are there specific ones if they want to do a specific thing that they can get?
So it really just depends on who you're applying with. And I would try everyone because they can be pretty competitive. I know for me, it's actually funny. So when I got my first internship, I sent emails to all of the TV stations in that market, and only one, I think, got back to me. And it wasn't even in news. It was in the communications department at KPIX in San Francisco, the CBS station. And I remember thinking, if I can just get into the station, I will work everything out. I've got that drive. I have that tenacity. I will work this out. And I ended up liking that internship, and I love that boss. She's a mentor to this day. She's just great. And I had so many great experiences under her, and she knew that news was what I wanted to do. So after doing that for a year and building up that rapport and everybody in the newsroom knowing who I was and that I was a good worker, I kind of inched my way over into the news side, and I said, hey, this is something I want to do. Would you be okay with this? And she goes, yeah, that's totally fine. And so talked to the folks with news, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And so I ended up creating a dual internship program because I didn't want to give her up either. And so I was still doing the communications and doing news. And then later I ended up just focusing and moving over to news because it was just too much to do both. But that's the thing. If you can get in and figure it out, you start just being in the room, right? Hamilton, being in the room where it happens. And that's where I was able to do that. So it really just depends on where you're applying. There are different tracks, right? Different departments that you can work in. And so experience everything. And that was the thing about my first job when I was working in Dallas. It was that producer training program, but it was a rotation. So I was able to work on the assignment desk. That's kind of like the heartbeat of a newsroom where all the phone calls come into and the assignments go out. I was also able to work in the web department, which was great because I understand what they're dealing with and kind of the deadlines to get things up on our website quickly. I also got to work as a writer and put things together that were going in the show. I also got to field produce for our anchors and write their anchor packages, their stories that they would put together. And that's how I learned how to write quickly. Then it happened to be an Olympic year, so our social media director left to be a producer for the station group for NBC. And while she was gone, I became the social media director for the station. So I was doing things in social media. So having that breadth of experience is vital because then I understand what each department in a newsroom is going through and what kind of deadlines they're operating off of. And I know how to have those conversations with them to be able to get them what they need in a timely fashion.
So one of the questions that we had was, we see you on the news, right? We see you on your stories, but what does a typical day look like? Like, is your day just that, hour that you're on television? Or tell us a little bit about what's your day.
So this is always an interesting question because there is no typical day.
The news.
It's the news.
In DC.
How about this? There's a framework, right? No, that goes out the door. So the framework is, I work at night. So you usually find me reporting for our 11 o'clock shows and our 10 o'clock shows on our 24/7 station. So my day usually starts in the middle of the day where I'm making phone calls, trying to contact folks to get story ideas presented. So usually by 2:30, so my day officially starts at 3:30, but usually by 2:30, I try to send an email that says, hey, these are all of my pitches. As in, these are the people I've talked to. This is what I could potentially report on. This is the gist of what they would say. I send that all to all of our managers and to our producers so that they have an idea of what's doable. Then 3:30, we have a phone call. And at that phone call, we make the decision of what we're going to do for that day. So once I get off of that phone call, hopefully it's quick, sometimes it's not, but once I get off of that phone call, I'll then be assigned a photographer to work with for the day. So then we'll go out and then we'll start gathering the elements to tell the story. That means getting the B-roll, the video that we're going to use to cover the story, and then the interviews that we're going to get, the people that we're going to talk to. So once we get all that done, we then either sit in the car or go back to the station, and then I log what the sound that we got, and I look at the video that we have, and then I start writing the story. I try to be done by about 8:30 at the latest, because I like to give my photographer at least an hour to put the story together. So once I finish writing, I'll send that in to my producers. Then they'll read it, make sure everything makes sense, make sure I don't have any factual errors. And then once that's done, they send it back to me and say, okay, you're good to go. So then I'll track it, which means I do the audio for it, my voice, I read my script, and then the photographer then edits it. And usually on a good day, while he's editing, I'll then start working on the web script and start putting that together so that can go on the website. And I, in theory, have taken pictures as well, and I'll send that to them. Then once he finishes, and I say he because we only have male photographers, but there are female photographers and we need more of them in this industry.
You guys hear that?
Once he finishes, I then will look at it and make sure that I'm happy with it and that it makes sense. And I think it's good to have a second set of eyes on something, because he might have done something that changes the meaning based on the video that he might have put with it, which he didn't mean to do. And so if there's something like that, I'm like, hey, let's switch this up a little bit, or this makes it seem like this. And it's usually a conversation. And from there, he sends that in, the edited version. And then at that point, at least in theory, 20 minutes before we go to air. And so then 10 o'clock comes around and I do my first live shot. And then if we need to make any changes to it between 10 and 11, we'll do that. Or I'll finish writing the web story if I haven't between 10 and 11, and then 11 o'clock comes and then I'll do something similar for our 11 o'clock newscast. And then we go home.
So that's a lot of work for your story.
A minute and a half. So I literally spend 6-7 hours for a minute and a half.
So this is fascinating to me. So you do all of that, you're prepared, ready to go, and then breaking news happens.
Oh, it's the worst.
How do you just kind of go in when something happens and talk off the cuff?
So when breaking news happens, you just get to the scene and ask those questions. And I've had several situations where I've gotten to a scene, we're waiting around. Whoever is leading that news conference will give you a news conference, and this might happen a couple of minutes before you're live. So I'm literally trying to take notes as fast as I can, making sure I'm understanding what they've said, and turn that around and boom, start talking about it. So there are some days where you don't have much time. There are other days where you have a little more time to put some stuff together. There are other days where you may not even be there, right? Because you're driving to get there when this news conference is happening, because you were in another location. They sent somebody else. So then you're watching or listening to the news conference as it's happening, almost like everybody else. And then you get there and you're hoping that your question gets answered or gets asked and answered so that you have some more context to add to whatever the story is. But as soon as you get there, you might have to go live and do it really quickly. And so your brain is constantly moving and being shape-shifted quite a bit on some days.
So can you tell us the difference between the people, and I'm assuming they're the students referring to reporters who report inside versus those who are reporting outside?
Yeah, so maybe anchors versus reporters.
Sure, yep, there you go.
So anchors are the people who you see on the desk, who are usually inside the studio, and they're reading off a teleprompter and explaining the story and kind of navigating you through that. The reporters are the one who get sent out into the field and are talking to the people on the ground of what's happening, what's going on, and they then front it live, usually outside somewhere, and they give you the news. And if there is no reporter, then that anchor kind of serves as a reporter, where they're giving you that deep dive of whatever it is that they're talking about for that day.
Okay, very good. And the final question is, why don't all of the news stations have all of the same stories when we're in the same city and have all of the same things happening?
That's a really good question. Sometimes they do, but also we're in a really big area, right? And so there could be multiple lead stories. And so and lead stories and what's the most important. It also depends on, you know, what matters to the people who are watching, right? And certain companies or stations probably have certain ideas of what, and certain, not necessarily mottos, but certain types of stories that they want to tell as well. And so that can lead to those decisions. And also you have different people that work at each of those different stations, and those people bring different backgrounds. And so what's important to person over here might be very different from what's important to person over here. Maybe not very different, but it just for that day, it could be different based on the experiences and the things that they bring to the table, which is why it's so important to have a diverse array of people in the newsroom and the people that are making those decisions, because the more conversations you can have about why this story is important or why that story is important is so important, because that's how you get stories told accurately, especially about communities of color and minority communities where you don't necessarily hear a lot about them. I think it's so important to have those diverse voices in the newsroom making those decisions on what we should cover.
Amazing. I'm learning so much. So Justin, thank you so much for being here with us today. Do you have any final pieces of advice, any final words, anything you'd like to leave our students with tonight?
Yeah, I would just say be open. I don't know how many of you are aspiring journalists, but if you are, be open. That's really the key, and being flexible, especially in this news industry. I mean, I'm a kid that grew up in San Diego and I'm on the East Coast now, right? For me, it was just going where the job was. And I think that mentality, especially when you're getting started, is so important, just to be open to the ideas, the possibilities, and what's out there, because if you're so closed off, you don't know what you could be potentially missing out on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for joining us for our third Fireside Chat. This has been really enlightening, and like I'm gonna be watching the news totally differently now, just because I can like catch all these little nuances we didn't have before. So as we mentioned, Justin is on channel 7, and you can catch him most evenings on the 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock news.
Got it. Wednesday through Sunday.
Wednesday through Sunday.
Not true at all. Saturday through Wednesday.
What is time?
What is today?
What is time? Well, thank you again, Justin, and we will absolutely be tuning in and catching your show, and we're really excited to have you with us again tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and best of luck to all of you. I know you guys are going to be successful and have great careers.